The sleek research vessel, Horizon, drifted silently in orbit around planet XB-427, its sensors working overtime to process the chaotic data pouring in from the world below. Captain Reed frowned at the holographic display, running a hand through his gray hair. "This can't be right," he muttered. "Run the atmospheric tests again." Officer Bell tapped at her console, her blue skin catching the dim light of the bridge. "Already did, sir. 3 times. The readings are consistent." The bridge fell silent as the crew of the Galactic Alliance's premier research team stared at the swirling mass of clouds covering the planet. XB-427 looked beautiful from space. Bands of purple, green, and amber clouds wrapped around a blue-gray surface. But the beauty hid a deadly truth. Temperature shifts of over 80 degrees in a single-day cycle, Lieutenant Park reported, reading from his screen. Atmosphere contains at least 14 compounds toxic to all Alliance species. Gravity fluctuates between 1.5 and 2.2 times galactic standard. And those storms. He gestured to the display where massive electrical discharges lit up half a continent. Dr. Morris, the expedition's lead scientist, stepped forward. Her 4 arms were all busy, 2 typing on a datapad, 1 adjusting her glasses, and 1 pointing at the main screen. "The mineral readings are off the charts," she said. "The planet has the largest deposits of trinaxium we've ever found, enough to power the Alliance for centuries." Captain Reed sighed. "But no one can survive down there to mine it." "Not necessarily," Dr. Morris countered. "We could design automated mining systems, heavily shielded, of course." The captain nodded slowly. "Draft a report for Alliance Command. We'll recommend XB-427 be classified as a resource-only planet. No colonization potential." As the crew worked, none of them noticed the small warning light blinking on a secondary console. Deep in the planet's crust, something was moving, something that didn't register properly on their sensors. 3 months later, the first wave of automated mining units descended to XB-427's surface. Massive tank-like machines with reinforced hulls, designed to withstand the harsh environment. Engineers had worked day and night to create equipment that could function in the planet's extreme conditions. The launch was celebrated across the Alliance. News feeds showed the mining units dropping through XB-427's atmosphere, landing successfully on the mineral-rich plains. Politicians gave speeches about progress and prosperity. Corporate executives calculated profits. For 6 weeks, everything went perfectly. The mining units extracted tons of valuable minerals, processing them for transport to orbital collection stations. Resource ministers across the Alliance began making plans based on the new supply source. Then the failures began. First, it was communications glitches, short outages blamed on the electromagnetic storms. Next came efficiency drops as mining units reported mechanical problems. Within days, entire units went offline completely. The Alliance sent repair drones. The drones malfunctioned before reaching the surface. They sent better shielded recovery units. These units reported no signs of physical damage to the original miners before they too failed. In an emergency meeting at Alliance headquarters, Admiral Jones slammed his fist on the table. "We've invested billions in this operation. I want solutions, not excuses." A junior officer cleared his throat. "Sir, there's someone who might be able to help. A new member species of the Alliance. They call themselves humans. Their representative claims they specialize in survival under harsh conditions." The Admiral waved dismissively. "No sentient species can survive on XB-427. We've established that. The human insists they can, sir. Says they want to try." The room fell silent. "Fine," the Admiral finally said. "If this human wants to commit suicide, let them. At least we can say we tried everything." None of them could have predicted what would happen next. Jack Stone stood at the observation window of the transport ship, watching as planet XB-427 grew larger. Unlike the Alliance officials who kept their distance from the viewport, he pressed his hand against the glass, eyes wide with interest rather than fear. "You still have time to change your mind," Captain Moore said, keeping a safe distance from both the window and the human. "No one would think less of you." Jack turned, a half-smile on his weathered face. "Where I come from, we have a saying. Nothing ventured, nothing gained." The captain's translator beeped as it processed the Earth phrase. "Your species has strange sayings," he replied, "and stranger ideas about what constitutes acceptable risk." The transport ship shuddered as it entered the upper atmosphere of XB 427. Warning lights flashed as the external sensors registered the hostile environment. The ship's AI announced, "Warning. External temperature 52 degrees below freezing. Toxic compounds detected. Electromagnetic interference increasing." The Alliance crew members looked uncomfortable, but Jack merely checked his equipment one final time. His environmental suit was unlike the bulky protection gear used by Alliance species. It was thinner, more flexible, designed by humans who had centuries of experience exploring the harshest environments on their own world. "The drop pod is ready," announced the ship's technician, "though I still believe this mission is ill-advised." Jack nodded thanks as he picked up his supply pack. "Noted, but those mining units cost your Alliance a fortune, and I'm betting I can fix them." Admiral Ross, who had traveled with the transport specifically to witness this mission, stepped forward. "Mr. Stone, I must ask once more, are you aware of the survival statistics for XB 427? 0% survival rate for all known species," Jack replied calmly. "But humans haven't tried yet." The Admiral's face tentacles twitched with concern. "And what makes humans different?" Jack thought for a moment before answering. "Our world has deserts where temperatures reach 50 degrees and polar regions that drop to -60. We have oceans, mountains, rainforests, and wastelands. Humans have lived in all of them. We've survived plagues, radiation, starvation. We adapt. It's what we do best." The crew fell silent, watching as this strange two-armed, two-legged creature with its peculiar confidence prepared to descend to a world that had defeated their best technology. Jack sealed his helmet and gave a thumbs up, another gesture the Alliance members found puzzling. He stepped into the drop pod, a small craft barely big enough for one person and essential supplies. "Communication may be spotty due to the storms," he said. "If you don't hear from me for a few days, don't panic. I'll be fine." The pod door sealed with a hydraulic hiss. "Launch in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, the ship's computer announced. With a thud and whoosh of decompression, the pod shot from the belly of the transport ship, beginning its controlled fall toward the surface of XB 427. Inside the pod, Jack felt the increasing gravity push him deeper into his seat. The tiny craft shook violently as it encountered atmospheric turbulence. Outside the small window, electrical storms lit up the cloud layers like continuous explosions. Enjoying the light show, Jack muttered to himself as the pod's heat shield began to glow from entry friction. The communication system crackled. "Stone, can you hear us? Your trajectory is being affected by unexpected gravity fluctuations. We're losing tracking ability." "I copy," Jack replied calmly. "I'll handle it manually." He grasped the emergency controls, making tiny adjustments that kept the pod from spiraling out of control. His human reflexes, evolved through millennia of hunting, climbing, and surviving, allowed him to feel and react to the craft's movements in ways the automated systems couldn't match. The pod broke through the final clouded layer. Below, a twisted landscape of jagged rock formations and strange crystalline structures stretched to the horizon. Lightning arced continuously between the taller formations. "Beginning final descent," Jack reported. "And Admiral, get ready to be surprised." The pod's retro rockets fired, slowing its fall as it approached the uninhabitable surface, where no sentient being had ever survived. The landing was rough, Jack's drop pod bounced 3 times across the rocky surface of XB 427 before coming to rest at an angle against a towering crystal formation. Inside, Jack hung sideways in his harness, wincing at a sharp pain in his ribs. The impact had been harder than expected. "Stone to horizon, I've landed," he said into his communicator. Static answered him. He tried again, adjusting frequencies, but the electromagnetic storms were blocking transmission. "Guess I'm on my own," he muttered. The pod's external sensors painted a grim picture. Temperature outside was 30 degrees below freezing, wind speeds approaching 90 kilometers per hour, and the air was thick with particles that would tear lungs apart. The gravity meter showed 1.8 times Earth normal, enough to crush the bones of some Alliance species. Jack checked his suit's integrity and took a deep breath. Only one way to find out if this works. He unsealed the pod's door. Instantly, howling wind rushed in, carrying stinging particles that bounced off his visor. The increased gravity hit him like a heavy blanket, making each movement an effort. Jack gritted his teeth and pulled himself out onto the surface of XB 427. His first steps were wobbling, unsteady. The weight of his own body and equipment seemed to push him into the ground. Each breath felt like lifting weights with his chest, but he kept moving, forcing his muscles to work. "One foot in front of the other," he said to himself, just like mountain climbing back home. By the time Jack reached the first disabled mining unit 2 kilometers away, his body was already changing. Human muscles, designed to tear and rebuild stronger, were responding to the increased gravity. His lungs were adapting to filter the dangerous particles, just as they would adjust to high altitudes on Earth. The mining unit was a massive machine, half buried in crystalline dust. Jack popped open the access panel and whistled at what he saw. "No wonder you stopped working," he said to the machine. Its inner components were covered with a strange, glittering residue that resembled frost, but conducted electricity in unpredictable ways. Jack scraped some into a sample container. This wasn't normal planetary dust. It behaved almost like it was alive. As the days passed, Jack established a small base camp near 3 disabled mining units. Each morning, the crushing gravity felt slightly more manageable. By the end of the first week, he could move almost normally, his body having adapted to the constant strain. The temperature shifts were brutal. One day, he woke to find his equipment covered in ice, the temperature having plummeted overnight. By midday, it had swung to 40 degrees above freezing, turning the ground around him into steaming mud. Jack found his human body, evolved to handle everything from African heat to Arctic cold, could manage these swings better than any Alliance species. Even more surprising was his developing ability to sense the electromagnetic storms. Jack noticed a tingling sensation in his temples about 20 minutes before each major storm hit. It gave him just enough warning to seek shelter inside reinforced mining units. He wondered if the constant exposure was activating dormant human senses, similar to how some Earth animals could detect earthquakes or storms. Adaptation log, day 12, Jack recorded in his personal journal. "I've fixed 2 mining units so far. The issue isn't mechanical failure. Something on this planet is interfering with them deliberately. The residue I'm finding shows patterns too regular to be natural." That night, as Jack lay in his tent listening to the howling winds, he sensed movement outside. Not the usual storm patterns, but something deliberate. He grabbed his light and stepped out into the alien night. For just a moment, illuminated in his beam, stood a crystalline figure, vaguely humanoid but transparent, with light pulsing through its body. It didn't move like anything made of rock should be able to move. Their eyes met, or at least Jack thought they did, before the figure vanished into the swirling dust storm. "Well," Jack whispered, his breath forming clouds in the freezing air, "that explains a lot." Jack spent the next 3 days trying to catch another glimpse of the crystalline figure. He set up motion sensors around his camp, adjusted their sensitivity to detect even the slightest movement, but the being remained elusive. On the morning of the 16th day, Jack woke to find strange markings in the dirt outside his shelter. They resembled mathematical equations, but with symbols he didn't recognize. He photographed them carefully before the next dust storm could erase them. "This is deliberate communication," he said into his recorder. "Whatever lies here is intelligent and curious about me." That afternoon, as Jack worked on repairing a third mining unit, he felt the familiar tingling that warned of an approaching electromagnetic storm. But this time, the sensation was different, more focused, almost like a gentle pressure against his mind. He looked up from his work and froze. Standing just 10 meters away was not one but three of the crystalline beings. In the daylight, their bodies shimmered like glass with electric currents flowing through them in complex patterns. They stood perfectly still, watching him. Jack slowly raised his hands, palms outward, in a universal gesture of peace. "Hello," he said simply. "I mean no harm." The tallest of the three beings stepped forward. Its body made a soft chiming sound as it moved. It raised what appeared to be an arm, mimicking Jack's gesture. "You understand me," Jack said, his heart racing with excitement. "You're the ones disabling the mining machines, aren't you?" The being tilted its crystalline head. A series of light pulses moved through its transparent body, forming patterns that reminded Jack of neural networks. Jack pointed to the mining unit. "These machines take minerals from your world. You don't want them here." The being extended what looked like fingers toward the machine. Where it touched, frost-like crystals immediately formed, creeping into the machinery's joints and seams. "That's how you do it," Jack whispered, watching in fascination. "You're silicon-based life forms, existing partially out of phase with normal matter." The being withdrew its hand, and the three creatures communicated among themselves through pulses of light that moved between their bodies. Jack's mind raced with implications. Planet XB-427 wasn't uninhabited. It had a native intelligent species that the Alliance's sensors had completely missed. A species that could manipulate matter and energy in ways he'd never seen before. "I need to document this," Jack said, slowly reaching for his camera. The beings watched without interference as he took photographs and readings. As the real storm approached, the beings began to fade, becoming transparent until they vanished completely. Jack wondered if they shifted into another phase of reality during storms, as protection from the intense electromagnetic pulses. Back in his shelter, as wind and energy battered the reinforced walls, Jack examined his data. The beings registered barely at all on standard sensors, appearing as minor electromagnetic anomalies rather than life forms. No wonder the Alliance hadn't detected them. "I'll call them the Shapers," he decided, noting how they could manipulate crystalline structures and electrical pathways. "They're indigenous to XB-427 and clearly sentient." Jack spent the night creating a basic pictorial communication system on his tablet. If the Shapers could see in the same visual spectrum as humans, perhaps they could begin to understand each other. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind an alien landscape transformed by new crystal formations that hadn't existed before. The beauty of it took Jack's breath away. Sitting outside his shelter was one of the Shapers, apparently waiting for him. Next to it was a complex crystal structure, a perfect replica of Jack's living shelter, but miniaturized. A gift, or a message? Jack wondered aloud. The Shaper extended its arm, light pulsing through its body in patterns that seemed almost eager. Jack smiled and sat down across from the being, placing his tablet between them. "Let's learn about each other," he said, activating the simple pictorial program he created. The Shaper leaned forward, its crystalline body chiming softly as light danced within it. For the first time in galactic history, a human and a silicon-based life form began to communicate. The Alliance retrieval ship descended through XB-427's atmosphere with extreme caution. Captain Moore had argued against landing at all, preferring to extract Jack using remote systems. Admiral Ross overruled him. If Stone has truly discovered a new sentient species, Alliance protocol demands official first contact, the Admiral had insisted. Through the viewport, the landing team watched lightning dance between crystal formations. The ship's systems struggled against the electromagnetic interference, but the modified shielding, based on Jack's transmitted specifications, held firm. "I still can't believe he survived down there for almost 2 months," Lieutenant Park said, checking his environmental suit for the 3rd time. "Let alone discovered an entire civilization we somehow missed." The shuttle touched down half a kilometer from Jack's camp. The team stepped out onto the surface, immediately feeling the crushing gravity. Despite their reinforced suits, movement was difficult and awkward. Jack stood waiting for them, wearing only a lightweight environmental suit that seemed impossibly inadequate for the conditions. Next to him was nothing visible to the Alliance team's eyes. "Welcome to what the natives call Crystalis," Jack called out, walking easily across the rough terrain. His body had changed. He was leaner, more muscular, moving with perfect balance despite the high gravity. Admiral Ross stepped forward awkwardly in his heavy suit. "Stone, our sensors are still showing no signs of life apart from you. If this is some kind of stress-induced hallucination, they exist slightly out of phase with our reality," Jack explained. "Your sensors aren't calibrated correctly." He held up a small device. "This neural interface will help you perceive them. With your permission." The Admiral hesitated, then nodded. Jack placed the device against the Admiral's helmet, where it adhered and began to glow softly. Admiral Ross gasped. Suddenly visible beside Jack stood a crystalline being nearly 2 meters tall, its transparent body filled with pulsing light patterns. Behind it, dozens more had appeared, watching the visitors with what could only be described as cautious interest. "May I present Crystal, representative of the Shaper civilization," Jack said formally. "They've inhabited this planet for millions of years, developing a society and technology completely different from anything in the Alliance database." The Admiral struggled to find words. How did we miss this?" Jack gestured toward the nearest mining unit. "The Alliance looks for carbon-based life, breathable atmospheres, recognizable structures. The Shapers are silicon-based, exist partially as energy, and build their cities underground where the crystal formations reach the planet's core. They're as alien to us as we are to them." Over the next several hours, Jack mediated the first official meeting between the Alliance representatives and the Shapers. With the neural interfaces, basic communication was possible. The Admiral watched in amazement as Jack switched effortlessly between human speech and the light pulse language he had developed with the Shapers. According to Alliance law, the Admiral finally said, XB-427 must immediately be reclassified as a protected world. "All mining operations will cease." Jack translated, and Crystal's body glowed with bright pulses. "They're pleased," Jack explained, "but cautious. They've seen outsiders before, over the centuries. None stayed long enough to communicate until I arrived." Later, back on the shuttle, Admiral Ross studied the extensive documentation Jack had compiled. Images of the Shapers, recordings of their light language, and detailed observations of their society. "This changes everything," the Admiral said. "Not just our mining operations, but our entire understanding of where life can evolve. Our xenobiologists have been too narrow in their definitions." Jack nodded. "The universe is more diverse than we imagined, and humans might be uniquely positioned to discover that diversity." "Because of our adaptability?" the Admiral asked. "Exactly," Jack replied. "Where other Alliance species see only hostile conditions, we see challenges to overcome. That's valuable." As the shuttle prepared for departure, Jack stood at the viewport, looking down at the crystal landscape below. Crystal stood watching, its light patterns forming what Jack now recognized as a farewell. "I'll be back," Jack promised, though he knew the Shaper couldn't hear him through the ship's hull. This is just the beginning. Days turned into weeks as Jack worked to build a language bridge with the Shapers. The process was slow but steady. He named his main contact Crystal, though he had no idea if the being had a concept of individual names. Each morning, Crystal would appear near Jack's shelter, sometimes bringing small crystal formations, gifts that Jack realized were actually tools designed to help him survive the planet's harsh conditions. One was a resonating crystal that warned of underground tremors before they happened. Another absorbed harmful radiation from the frequent solar flares. "The Alliance thinks this planet is trying to kill visitors," Jack said as he recorded his daily log. "They're wrong. The planet isn't hostile. It's just different, and the Shapers have adapted perfectly to these conditions." Communication progressed through pictures, then simple symbols, then combinations that began to form a rudimentary language. Jack learned that the Shapers perceived reality in ways humans couldn't naturally comprehend. They existed simultaneously in physical form and as energy patterns, shifting between states as needed. One morning, Jack attempted something new. He had noticed the Shapers could create tiny electrical impulses within their crystalline bodies, similar in some ways to human neural patterns. He modified a neural interface from his equipment and carefully placed it on his temple. "Let's try this," he said to Crystal, who watched with what Jack had come to recognize as curiosity, a brightening of internal light patterns. The interface activated with a soft hum. At first, nothing happened. Then Jack felt a strange sensation, like thousands of tiny electrical impulses brushing against his mind. Not words exactly, but concepts, emotions, images all mingled together. "Can understand." The question wasn't spoken but somehow formed in Jack's mind. Jack gasped, "Yes, I can understand you." Crystal's body pulsed with bright blue light. Excitement, Jack had learned. Wide, destroy, home. The concepts came slowly, painfully simplified for human comprehension. "The mining machines. We didn't know anyone lived here," Jack explained. "The Alliance thought the planet was empty. They need the minerals, but they would never knowingly harm an intelligent species." Doubt flowed through the connection. Jack felt Crystal's distrust of outsiders and saw fragmented memories of previous expeditions to the planet, long before the Alliance had officially discovered it. Those visitors had taken samples and left, never attempting communication. "You, different." Crystal's thoughts formed in Jack's mind. "You, adapt. Like us. Humans are good at adapting," Jack agreed. "It's how we survived on our own world." Through the neural connection, Jack received a flood of images, the Shapers' history on the planet. They had evolved over millions of years, developing the ability to shift between physical and energy states to survive the extreme conditions. The electromagnetic storms that the Alliance feared were actually vital to Shaper reproduction, their equivalent of pollination. Mining, hurts, deep places, Crystal communicated, showing Jack images of planetary layers where young Shapers developed. Jack felt shame wash over him. "I didn't know. The Alliance didn't know, but now I can tell them." Crystal's light patterns darkened. "Others, not listen. Only destroy." "They'll listen to me," Jack promised. "Humans can be bridges between different kinds of life. Let me prove it to you." For the first time, Jack activated his long-range communicator, hoping the neural interface might help boost the signal through the electromagnetic interference. "Stone to horizon," he called. "Come in, Horizon. I've made first contact with an indigenous intelligent species. The planet is inhabited. I repeat, XV427 is inhabited by a sentient species." Static crackled, then broke. "Stone, is that you? We thought you were dead." Jack looked at Crystal, whose body was pulsing with cautious light patterns. "I'm very much alive," Jack replied. "And I'm not alone. Prepare for a first contact protocol. And tell the mining division to cease operations immediately." Through their mental link, Crystal sent one clear thought. "Trust, difficult." Jack nodded. "Yes, trust is difficult, but it's the beginning of everything important." 6 months after Jack Stone's discovery on XB427, the main chamber of the Galactic Alliance headquarters buzzed with activity. Representatives from over 300 member species filled the circular room, their voices creating a symphony of different tones and languages. At the center stood Jack, now wearing the blue uniform of the newly formed Human Diplomatic Corps. Beside him was Crystal, the Shaper's crystalline body drawing curious stares from throughout the chamber. High Chancellor Vex called for silence, his 4 arms raised high. "Today marks a historic occasion for the Alliance," he announced. "For the first time, we welcome a silicon-based, phase-shifting species as an observer member. The Shapers of Planet Crystallis, formerly XB427, will share their unique perspective with us." Applause rippled through the chamber. Jack smiled, remembering how just months ago, these same officials had written off the planet as uninhabitable. Furthermore, the Chancellor continued, "This discovery has led to a complete revision of our planetary classification system. Thanks to human adaptability, we have found life where we believed none could exist." On the large display screens throughout the chamber, images appeared of 12 newly explored extreme worlds. Each had been considered impossible for sentient life by Alliance standards. Each now showed evidence of indigenous civilizations, detected by human explorers using techniques developed from Jack's experiences. "Humanity has proven itself uniquely valuable to the Alliance," the Chancellor said. "Their evolutionary background on a planet with diverse and changing environments has created a species capable of adapting where others cannot." After the ceremony, Jack met with Admiral Ross in a quieter meeting room. The Admiral had been promoted to Director of Exploration, largely due to his support of Jack's mission. "The Human Diplomatic Corps already has 300 volunteers," the Admiral said, examining reports on his screen. "We've identified 27 more planets with conditions similar to Crystallis that warrant investigation." Jack nodded, looking through the window at the stars. "We were explorers long before we joined the Alliance. Earth's history is full of people who went to the most extreme environments. The highest mountains, the deepest oceans, the coldest poles, just to see what was there." "And now you'll do the same among the stars," the Admiral said. "The other Alliance species are impressed. Some are even a bit afraid." Jack laughed. "Afraid? Of humans? Your adaptability is unsettling to some." The Zentari delegate called humans environmental shapeshifters. "I'll take that as a compliment," Jack replied. "Though the real shapeshifters are the Shapers. Speaking of which," he checked the time, "I should get Crystal to the new embassy." The first Shaper embassy occupied an unusual structure built specifically to accommodate their unique biology. Special crystal formations grown from crystallis minerals created an environment where the Shapers could phase shift comfortably. As Jack escorted Crystal through the Alliance capital, citizens stopped to stare at the strange being of light and Crystal walking alongside the human. Many, "Watch," Crystal communicated through their neural link. "You're something new," Jack explained. "People are curious." "Like you, we're curious," Crystal responded, its light patterns forming what Jack had come to recognize as humor. At the embassy entrance, a small crowd had gathered. Among them were 5 humans in environmental preparation suits, the next team heading to Crystallis to help establish formal diplomatic ties. "The pioneers," Jack said proudly, introducing them to Crystal. "They'll continue what we started." That evening, Jack stood on the observation deck of the Alliance headquarters, looking at the galaxy spread before him. In just 6 months, humanity had found its place among the stars, not as warriors or traders or even scientists, but as bridges between worlds that couldn't otherwise connect. A message alert chimed. It was from the Exploration Division. Another extreme planet, another potential civilization detected by preliminary scans. The note ended with a simple question. Human volunteers needed. Interested? Jack smiled and typed his response. "Always."